He'd flown 12,000 kilometers to prove he was the best soldier in the room. One sentence changed everything. Any Filipino here think your little commandos can beat a German officer? Step up right now. The German was 6'3", built like a tank, iron cross on his chest, voice like a gunshot. The entire multinational camp froze. Americans stopped chewing. Australians put down their beers, phones came out. Across the parade square, 100 Filipino Special Forces soldiers stood perfectly still. Until one man, barely 5'7", no expression, no muscle show, took one quiet step forward. He looked up at the German giant and said only 2 words that made the internet lose its mind for months. Challenge accepted. What happened next broke the German in 4 different ways, turned a cocky officer into a student, and created a video that has 187 million views and counting. This is that story, don't blink. You're about to witness the most savage, most respectful, most humbling beatdown ever caught on camera. And the moment that came after it is the part that makes grown men cry. It started with sandbags, 100 kilos each, 400 meters of pure hell. Walls, trenches, razor wire, and mud thick enough to swallow boots. The German attacked it like a bull. He was 20 meters ahead in the first 10 seconds. Crowd roaring, he was smiling. The Filipino never rushed. He just moved steady, breathing like he was on a Sunday jog. Halfway through, the German started dying. The sun cooked him. The mud ate him alive. The Filipino, still the exact same pace. Then he passed him, not with a sprint. Just flowed by like the German was standing still. He crossed the line, put the bag down like it was made of feathers, and stepped aside. Philippines. The German laughed it off. Fine, strength is one thing. Now we shoot. The range was evil. Pop-up targets, movers, hostage shots, and a steel plate at 600 meters so small you needed binoculars to see it. German went first, perfect score. Crowd lost it, even the Filipino colonel nodded. Not bad. Then the quiet guy took the rifle. He didn't lie down. He stood up like he was ordering coffee. 10 shots, 10 center hits. The hostage target didn't have a scratch. The 600-meter plate? He put 2 rounds through the exact same hole. You could cover both hits with a coin. An American sniper next to the camera just whispered, "What the f***ing blood? Philippines." Now the German was mad. Pride on fire, hand to hand. Circle in the dirt. First one out loses, no rules. They drew the ring. Crowd 10 deep, phones vertical. German charged like a freight train, punches, elbows, knees, pure violence. The Filipino eye disappeared, every strike hit air. Then, one soft touch on the chest and the German's own power launched him clean out of the ring. He landed on his ass in the dust, looking up like he'd seen a ghost. Crowd didn't cheer, they gasped. Third blood, Philippines. The German, voice shaking now, demanded one final test. Jungle. 12 kilometers, 5 markers. No GPS, just you, a compass, and whatever's in your soul. First one back wins. They walked into the green wall and vanished. 3 hours later, the Filipino walked out, combat clean, drinking water like he'd been gone 10 minutes. All 5 markers tied to his belt. 47 minutes after that, the German stumbled out, bleeding, half-blind from thorns, missing 1 marker, looking like the jungle had chewed him up and spat him out. He saw the Filipino waiting, walked straight over and collapsed. Dead silence, then the moment that broke the internet. The quiet Filipino unscrewed his canteen and handed it to the man who had insulted his entire country 6 hours earlier. "Drink," he said, "you fought well." The German took the water with shaking hands and started to cry. Not from losing, from understanding. He looked up and said the words that turned this from a viral beatdown into a legend. "Teach me." From that second on, the German followed the Filipino everywhere, learning how to move like smoke, how to listen to the jungle, how to fight without ego. By the end of the exercise, they weren't rivals anymore. They were brothers. And when the German flew home, he carried one thing in his pocket. A small red cloth marker the Filipino had given him. He still has it. So next time someone tells you size, medals, or loud mouths decide who wins, remember the day a quiet 5'7" islander destroyed a giant in 4 different ways, then handed him water and called him brother. That's not just skill, that's unstoppable. Turn on notifications because you'll never see another story like this. The camera that caught the water moment was shaky, some Australian warrant officer holding his phone overhead, but the clip spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours it had jumped from group chats to unit pages, from Pinoy Pride Facebook groups to Bundeswehr internal forums, then exploded across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Someone added the slow motion of the canteen passing from brown hand to pale hand, overlaid it with a single piano note, and captioned it, "He won the fight. Then he won the war." 187 million views later, the world still couldn't get enough. But the real story, the one the world never saw because the cameras were put away, began the morning after. 30, the jungle was still dripping from the night rain. Mist curled between the palms like cigarette smoke. Most of the camp was asleep, hungover from the closing party the night before. Only 2 men were awake. Lucas Reinhardt, still smelling of liniment and defeat, stood at the edge of the training area in PT shorts and boots, no shirt. His ribs were taped where a thorn branch had opened him the day before. Across from him, barefoot in the red dirt, was Sergeant Matthew Dela Cruz, rolling his shoulders the way a cat stretches after a nap. No audience, no phones, just cicadas and the soft thud of feet on wet earth. "Again," Lucas said in German, then caught himself and switched to English. From the beginning, Matthew nodded once. They started with the most basic thing in the world, walking, not marching. Walking. Matthew placed his hand lightly on Lucas's lower back. "Feel your spine," he said. "Not like a pole, like a rope. Loose at the bottom, strong at the top." Lucas tried. He had marched 100,000 kilometers in perfect 30-inch steps, but this was different. Matthew made him walk 10 meters, stop, walk back. Again, until Lucas's hips stopped fighting the ground and started listening to it. "European soldiers attack the earth," Matthew said quietly. "We ask permission." By the time the sun cleared the canopy, Lucas was sweating harder than he had carrying the sandbag. But for the first time in his life, his feet weren't making noise. They moved to the obstacle course, this time without the bags. Matthew went first, not running, just flowing. Over the 8-foot wall without touching the top. Under the wire without dragging his back. Through the mud without splashing, Lucas copied. He failed the wall twice, skinned his shin, cursed in 3 languages. Matthew waited, no laughter. No pity, just patience. On the 4th try, Lucas cleared it clean. He landed on the other side shaking, not from effort but from the realization that he had just done something his body had sworn was impossible 2 hours earlier. Matthew smiled, small and private. "Good. Now forget you did it. Muscle memory hates pride." They trained like that for 14 straight days. Mornings, silent movement, breath control, learning to drop heart rate on command. Afternoons, jungle reading. How to smell water before you see it. How to tell if a branch broke 5 minutes ago or 5 hours. How to move downhill without your knees screaming. Evenings, sitting on ammo crates under a single bulb, sharing coffee thick as tar, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas learned that Matthew grew up in a barangay so small it didn't have a name on most maps. His father was a fisherman lost to a typhoon when Matthew was 9. His mother sold bananas by the roadside to put him through school. He joined the army at 17 because the recruiter promised 3 meals a day and a chance to make his mother stop crying at night. Matthew learned that Lucas came from a family of Prussian officers stretching back to Frederick the Great. That his father still called him weak for choosing the enlisted path first before the officer academy. That every medal on his chest had been won to quiet a voice in his head that never believed he was enough. One night, fireflies drifting around them like green sparks, Lucas asked the question he had carried since the circle in the dirt. "How did you beat me that day, honestly? I have trained with Spetsnaz, with SEALs, with GIGN. No one moves like you." Matthew poked the fire with a stick. Sparks rose into the dark. "My Lolo, my grandfather, was a guerrilla in World War II. Japanese came to our province, he was 14. Too small for a rifle, so they gave him a bolo knife and told him to be quiet. For 3 years he lived in the mountains, killing sentries without a sound, taking their boots so his cousins would have something to wear. When the Americans landed, he guided them through trails the Japanese thought were impossible. He came home when he was 17, bone showing but alive. He taught me, the jungle does not care how strong you are. It only cares how still you can become." Matthew looked across the flames. "That day in the ring I wasn't fighting you, Lucas. I was being still while you fought yourself." Lucas stared into the fire for a long time. "I have spent my whole life fighting," he said finally. "I never learned how to stop." Matthew handed him a fresh cup of coffee. "Then we are even. I spent my whole life being still. I never learned how to start, we teach each other." The next day they added something new, live blade training. Matthew produced 2 bolo knives, short, curved, ugly things that looked more like farm tools than weapons. The edges were dull for safety, but the weight was real. They started slow. Matthew showed the basic angles, the way the wrist flicks, how the power comes from the hips, not the arm. Lucas, used to the straight lines of European saber fencing, moved like he was wearing a straitjacket. By the end of the first hour, he had blisters on both palms. By the end of the first week, he could mirror Matthew's movements so cleanly that from 10 meters away you couldn't tell who was leading. One afternoon, a rainstorm rolled in from the South China Sea, sudden, violent, the kind that turns dirt to soup in seconds. Most soldiers ran for cover. Matthew and Lucas stayed in the clearing, shirts plastered to their skin, blades flashing silver against the gray sky. They moved faster in the rain, slick, laughing for the first time like boys instead of soldiers. When the storm passed, steam rose from their bodies. Lucas looked at the smaller man and realized he was no longer trying to win. He was trying to keep up with a friend. On the 12th day, they ran the jungle course again. Same 12 kilometers, same 5 markers, but this time together. They moved as a single unit. Where Matthew saw the trail, Lucas counted pace. Where Lucas's long legs ate distance, Matthew's eyes caught the almost invisible trip vines. They found all 5 markers in 1 hour 53 minutes. A course record that will probably never be broken because no one else would be insane enough to try it for fun. When they burst out of the tree line laughing and gasping, a handful of soldiers who had been tracking their progress on radio stood with mouths open. An American captain filmed it on his GoPro. That clip, 2 soaking wet maniacs high-fiving like kids who just stole cookies, got 40 million views on its own. The night before Lucas flew home, the Filipinos threw a feast. Not the official one with generals and speeches, the real one. Down by the beach under coconut trees strung with Christmas lights even though it was August. Lechon turning on a spit. Rice in banana leaves, tuba in coconut shells, guitars and voices raised in songs older than any flag. Lucas sat between Matthew and the scarred colonel, being force-fed pork fat and stories. Someone put a flower lei around his neck. Someone else painted a tiny Philippine flag on his cheek with lipstick. He let them. He was too happy to care. At midnight, the fire was low. Most of the soldiers had passed out or wandered off to the water. Matthew and Lucas walked to the edge of the tide. Moonlight painted silver on the waves. Lucas carried a small wooden box he had carved himself with a borrowed knife. Rough, uneven, the work of a man who had never made anything with his hands that wasn't designed to kill. He handed it to Matthew. Inside was the red cloth marker from the jungle course, now sewn into a small patch. Beneath it, a challenge coin Lucas had commissioned from a jeweler in Manila. One side the German eagle, the other the Philippine sun and stars, and around the edge in tiny letters, balance. Matthew turned the coin over in his fingers for a long time. "I have something too," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin cord necklace. On it hung a single black shark's tooth, polished smooth. My Lolo took this from the first Japanese officer he ever killed. He wore it until the day he died. Said it reminded him that even the sharpest tooth is useless if the mouth is too loud. He slipped it over Lucas's head. They stood in silence while the waves rolled in and out. Finally, Lucas spoke, voice rough. "I came here thinking I would teach these people something. Instead, I am leaving a different man." Matthew smiled in the dark. "That is how it works, my friend. The island doesn't change you. It removes what was never really you to begin with." They embraced. Long, hard, backslapping the way men do when words are too small. The next morning, a C-130 waited on the runway, engines already turning. The entire Filipino company turned out to see him off. No speeches, just raised fists and quiet nods. Matthew stood at the bottom of the ramp. Lucas paused halfway up, turned and, for the first and only time in his military career, performed a perfect Filipino salute, slow and deep. Matthew returned it, eyes shining. The ramp closed. The plane lifted into the blue. 6 months later, a package arrived at Matthew's barracks in Fort Magsaysay. Inside, a thick winter jacket, German Army issue, brand new, a letter and a USB drive. The letter was in careful handwriting. "Brother, it is -20 here and snowing. I wore the shark tooth under my uniform today during an exercise in the Alps. My men thought I was crazy for smiling when we were waist-deep in snow. They do not understand yet. Watch the video when you have time. Miss you." Matthew plugged the USB into the ancient computer in the company office. The screen lit up with drone footage, black and white thermal imaging. A German special forces team moving through a forest at night. They flowed between the trees the way water flows downhill. No noise, no wasted motion. At the front, tall figure, easy to spot even in thermal. Lucas moving like a ghost. The caption at the bottom in German and then English, Scout Ranger style. Palawan 2025, never forget. Matthew watched it 5 times. Then he saved it to the shared drive labeled Training References Do Not Delete. 2 years later, a joint counter-terrorism exercise in Thailand. Different jungle, same heat. A company of German KSK commandos arrived. Best in Europe, maybe the world. Their commander stepped off the helicopter. Taller, leaner, eyes calmer than anyone remembered. The Thai general hosting the exercise did a double take. Hauptmann Reinhardt, you look different. Lucas smiled, small and dangerous. I had a good teacher. During the first night infiltration, the Germans moved so quietly that the opposing force, American Green Berets, swore the jungle was haunted. They never heard the enemy until the exercise blanks were already going off in their faces. After the exercise, during the wash-up, an American sergeant cornered Lucas. Dude, what the hell happened to you guys? You move like those crazy little Filipinos. Lucas laughed, the sound lighter than it used to be. We learned that strength is universal, he said, but silence is sacred. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the shark tooth, now polished smooth from years of being touched. This, he said, is the real weapon. 5 years after Palawan, a new batch of officer candidates at the Bundeswehr Academy in Hamburg sits in a dark auditorium. On the screen plays drone footage, night vision, snow, perfect movement. The instructor, now Major Lucas Reinhardt, Iron Cross with oak leaves, a quiet legend in his own right, stands at the podium. Gentlemen and ladies, he begins, today we are not talking about firepower or body armor. Today we talk about the day I lost everything and found what actually matters. He clicks to the next slide, a photograph of a small Filipino sergeant handing a canteen to a broken German officer. The auditorium is silent. This man beat me 4 times in one morning. Then he taught me for 14 days straight. He never raised his voice. He never celebrated a single victory. He simply showed me that the space between heartbeats is where wars are actually won. He lets that sink in. I want you to meet him. The side door opens. In walks Sergeant Major Matthew Dela Cruz, now the most decorated enlisted soldier in the Philippine Army. In crisp uniform, shark-tooth necklace just visible at his throat. The German candidates leap to their feet and applaud before they even realize they're doing it. Matthew looks embarrassed. Lucas just grins. For the next week, the two of them teach together. One tall, one short, one loud when he needs to be, one quiet always. They teach movement, awareness, humility, the way only men who have carried each other's weaknesses can. On the last night in the officers' mess over beer and sausages for once instead of rice and fish, Lucas raises a glass. To the man who destroyed my ego and rebuilt my soul. Matthew raises his own glass, eyes twinkling. To the man who reminded me that even the quietest blade needs a loud friend sometimes. They drink. Outside, snow falls soft and steady on Hamburg, just like rain once fell on Palawan. And somewhere in the world right now, a young soldier, maybe American, maybe Singaporean, maybe Brazilian, is watching that shaky phone video of a canteen being handed across a divide. They're watching a German giant bow his head to a Filipino scout. They're learning without realizing it, the only lesson that ever really matters. You don't become unstoppable by never losing. You become unstoppable by never refusing to learn from the man who just beat you, and then handing him water. Because that, more than any medal, more than any perfect shot or silent footstep, is what makes a warrior eternal. The story never ended in Palawan, it just spread, one quiet soldier at a time. One offered canteen at a time. One brother at a time. And if you ever find yourself in a jungle, or a desert, or a frozen forest, moving lighter than you thought possible, breathing easier than you ever have, check your pocket. You might just find a small red cloth, or a black shark tooth, or the memory of 2 men on a moonlit beach promising each other without words that the fight worth winning is the one that ends with both warriors still standing, side by side, unbreakable, because they learned together what unbreakable really means. And now, wherever they are, one under typhoon skies, one under northern lights, they still carry each other. Always, the end? No, just the beginning.